Hello and welcome to FrostBytes, where logistics and tech meet a fresh perspective. I'm your host and co-founder of PackSafe, Ilya Preston, and today I have the honor of speaking with our guest, Venu Gutlapalli. Vinu is the CEO and co-founder of Tag and Track, where he's leading the charge in building a next-gen real-time visibility and traceability platform to revolutionize global supply chains and multimodal logistics. With a focus on execution, agile scaling, and revenue growth, Venu is driving productization across supply chain, asset management, condition monitoring, powered by purpose-built IoT sensors. Prior to Tag and Track, Venu spent over 12 years at Qualcomm, most recently as the global head of customer success, where he led global teams in connectivity technologies across mobile, automotive, and IoT business units. He played a key role in bridging Qualcomm's cutting-edge wireless capabilities with the growing demands of mobile OEMs across the US, Asia, Europe, and India. With over 20 years of experience spanning GPS, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth, Venu brings a deep understanding of scalable tech deployment and customer-driven innovation. Outside the office, you'll find him enjoying time with his family, exploring new wine and food spots, or off-the-grid camping and backpacking in the wild. So, Vinu, welcome. I'm actually extra excited for this episode. We've had guests on from pharma, 3PLs, specialty couriers, packaging, but I believe you're our first IoT provider guest. And as you know, PackSafe in its early days had a hardware component to our business before we went agnostic. So there's certainly a special place in my heart for what you're doing. Welcome to the show, and thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor. I'm very excited to discuss what we can bring in, or where the industry is heading, and very exciting to talk about a few things here.
Excellent. So, yeah, before we get into your background, we want to start. We always start off with a shock to the system with what we call hot take. So what is the one opinion that you have about the cold chain logistics industry that you think others might find controversial or contrarian?
One of the thing I keep, because right now we're actively fundraising. So one of the metric we put out there is cold chain pharmaceutical supply chain is losing $35 billion a year, and 50% of the vaccines go waste. And if that's the size of the problem statement, I was expecting this to run like today. The technology should be deployed yesterday. That's what I find. Or why are we moving this slow? It should be fast. It should be running very speed to save some of that wastage and recover.
I'm in the same boat as you. 100% agree. I've run into that problem much the same way. And I'm curious what your take on this is. My hypothesis is actually that number is vastly underreported, both because obviously it's not a good look for the industry. You want to protect your brand and your image, but secondarily, we've actually found that there's a pretty substantial disconnect between the perception, especially at a senior leadership level within pharma, of how much loss you have and how much loss you actually have on the ground. In life. Have you run into the same thing?
I think the main problem there is the track and trace is still based on old school barcode, QR code, data metrics type use case, the type of data acquisition. Because of that, what happens is I believe there is not enough data to match what the industry metric thinks and what's actually happening on the ground. I think that's the reason why I think there's a transformation that need to happen to bridge that and really bring that innovation into the supply chain.
That makes a ton of sense. That makes a ton of sense, Vinu. And how are you helping bridge that gap today? How is Tag and Track doing that?
So for us, I think the main thing we're looking at is so we're looking at data, right? How do we acquire this data seamless between the different GXP states? You have GMP, which is a good manufacturing practice for pharmaceutical, and then it mainly happens at the CMOs or at the pharma their own manufacturings, right? So that's where the original SKU happens, and that's where the supply chain starts.
Mhm.
From there, it gets distributed through the GDP process, and then it goes to the last mile. And what we see is that there's a high precision of data accuracy at the GMP level at you manufacture. But
Yeah.
once the product leaves the GMP facility, that's when you start losing the accuracy of the data because you're still relying on somebody to do that scan one more time,
Yeah.
every handoff, every chain of custody change. But if that scan doesn't happen, and then even if that scan happens, how do I tie up the scan that's happening at a DHL warehouse and the scan that's happening at a GMP dispatch outbound? These two need to go into the same platform
Yeah.
to get that seamless data, right? If this connection is not there, you can do all the scans through the supply chain. On average, I think it takes around 20 to 25 scans through the
Yep.
process. And if all these scans are not pulled into one single place, you don't have a way to figure this out end to end. That's why I think the data is still very, very fragmented.
Yes.
And that's the reason why we think this smart label approach, where we convert these passive barcodes into an active tracker through a label, is the best way to convert this metadata, go through the supply chain along with the asset. That's where we think is the best way to transform this.
Makes a lot of sense, Vinu. Going back to your contrarian take around the 35 billion, who do you think? So you talked about there needing to be a greater, or your expectation that there would be a greater sense of urgency in solving for this problem.
Yes.
Who in the industry do you think has to be the driving force or the forcing function in solving this? Is it the manufacturer of the goods, or is it the service providers, the 3PLs that are moving the goods, that have obviously a vested interest in
Yeah.
transporting and storing goods in proper conditions, on time, in full, or they risk reputational harm? Which of the two parties, or someone else, has to be the driver?
In my view, I think the industry, it should be a partnership basis. The manufacturer responsibility is provide a fully qualified drug, and then his goal is to get this safely to the end patient, right? Now, for him to move these goods all the way to the end patient, there are several other ecosystem players in this process, right? There are distributors, there are 3PLs, freight forwarders. Then you have the last mile parcel delivery that's happening. Now, the manufacturer can actually define certain rules for his product. He wants certain way of the supply chain to be executed. That sets the benchmark for the 3PLs and the last mile distribution to follow. So it has to be driven by the manufacturer as a starting point to say, hey, my drug needs this type of supply chain. I want to deliver this type of quality. I want it should be data driven. I want to be sustainable. I want, intercept rates to be very, very low. So that should be some of the metrics that if they can define,
Mm-hmm.
then what happens is the rest of the supply chain will then say, oh, to meet these benchmarks, then this is the technology I want to adapt. Then the whole ecosystem starts coming together and say, hey, this is how my solution, I'll propose this solution. This is a solution for the last mile. The same, but all of them are still trying to meet that KPI set by the manufacturer, right? It has to be driven by the manufacturer as what the goal should be, as the vision should be.
Yeah.
Then the rest of the partners in the ecosystem should be, hey, this seems like a good industry benchmark. I would love to go and invest and get this done, right? So then they can scale it to the other vendors.
Have you found any partners in the industry from a 3PL, 4PL standpoint to be more of the drivers or more forward thinking than the manufacturers, where they're actually trying to improve the current state on their own without the prompting of the manufacturer?
I think, in my view, the younger pharmaceutical company manufacturers are embracing
Yeah.
to really go digital. I don't want to bring the names here, but there are few that are trying to innovate, trying to bring technology at a much faster pace. Then the second part we're also seeing is there's a new segment instead of a traditional 3PL. There are few others that are coming in. They're calling themselves the 4PLs, where they're trying to develop a full end-to-end white glove service, right? Where you move this product in a full digital fashion. This is happening, and we see this type of requirements start coming out through RFPs or through interactions in the trade shows that, hey, this is our vision. We do want to digitize this whole process and make this more seamless. And it's an industry trend. I think what I see is that most of the pharmaceutical ecosystem partners all want to be the first to second. So nobody wants to be the first.
Yeah.
So this first second syndrome is what actually causes the inertia to waiting, because somebody else is waiting for somebody else, and then this just delays the process. But that trend should change. I think we do see certain projects are happening, and we think that should transform.
Yeah, that's a perfect snippet. I think the first second, that's not anything I'd heard that terminology before, but that encapsulates it perfectly. I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
So Vinu, let's switch gears to what we call cold start. You've obviously had a long and storied career before Tag and Track. Tell us about that journey, maybe in 2 to 3 minutes, and tell us how you got to where you are today.
So yeah, thanks for asking my question. Let me see if I can summarize my 20 plus years of experience in 2-3 sentences. So I started as a wireless semiconductor systems engineer, and I was writing software for earlier smartphones early on. And that required, the smartphone is the one first started the whole location technology, right? How location can help you in the human lifestyle. I want to go to a restaurant, I want to go here, I want to go there. And that was all Yahoo Maps printed, and people used to drive with the papers. And then we worked on that technology to be on your smartphone fingertips, where you'd say, I want to go here. You just give a voice command, and the entire direction pops up on your screen. But that took us 8 years to deploy. What happens now on an Android or an iPhone took us 8 to 9 years to perfect it out of the box. That's how I started as a semiconductor wireless guy. Then I moved into more IoT and automotive and other segments. And the first generation IoT is all about your light bulbs, your Litex, thermostats, washing machine. Everybody wants to put some kind of connectivity into the appliances, and then that took the first generation of IoT. That's when I realized that it should be beyond light bulbs and thermostats. There should be a better application for this technology to drive. And then we realized supply chain is a perfect place for this, because the logistics handling of the supply chain is still 25-year-old barcode process. The modernization hasn't happened. Neither the data acquisition has modernization, nor the data capture itself is still stuck on barcodes. So that's when I came out of Tag and Track and started Qualcomm, and started Tag and Track with a vision that how do I modernize this logistics space.
That's a fascinating journey. How would you say Tag and Track today, how do you communicate to customers the differentiation between, say, Tag and Track and other real-time IoT device providers that are on the market?
So one of the approach we took is more of a platform approach to look at the supply chain holistically. Majority of the vendors that are today supplying real-time visibility, or mainly if the goods is in motion, then they try to put a dot on the map that, hey, this is the goods in motion, and this is currently where it is.
Mhm.
That's purely where most of the solutions were offering. But where we took a slightly different approach, actually completely different approach, the approach we took is, hey, we should look at this end to end, not just when the goods is in motion. It should be from the manufacturing. Hey, I manufactured 22 pallets. Now, what is in this 22 pallets? What temperature are these stored after manufacturing? And where are they going in the supply chain? How many are in the warehouse? How many are in transit? How many receive the destination? That's the approach we're taking. So the stack and the sensors we built is solutionized to capture from manufacturing to warehousing to the distribution to the last mile. So based on that, a customer can choose, hey, I want to digitize my entire supply chain, or they can decide, I want to first start with in transit, then move towards the left to the manufacturing, or move towards the right to the last mile. And you can do this end to end in phases, or you can do, any one of the phase and expand it. That's our main differentiation, is the solution is built as a platform. And then within that platform, you can pick what type of mile, the middle mile or the last mile, the first mile is what you're trying to digitize. That's how we architected, and that's how we differentiate.
That's fascinating. And can you tell our viewers maybe some of the nuances around the differences in what would be required from a provider, let's say in the first mile versus the middle mile versus the last mile? So what makes it difficult for somebody to come in and capture the same end-to-end approach that you did, that you've done so effectively?
I think the last mile is the most complex, because the first mile and the middle mile are lane basis. So every manufacturer in the supply chain has fixed lanes. So it starts with certain GMPs, goes to only 2 or 3 hubs in the GDP side.
Mhm.
But once it goes to beyond the distribution, when the bulk drug gets de-aggregated, and then the de-aggregated now need to go into a spoke of entire country, entire Europe, entire North America. When that type of distribution happens, that we're thinking that that is the most difficult part, to digitize and capture the SOPs from there, because there are 4 or 5 people involved in this. There's a parcel vendor, there's a 3PL that's moving it, then the manufacturer, then the last mile could be a patient, could be a hospital, could be a pharmacy. And then they're all distributed all over the US in thousands of destinations,
Mhm.
right? So that we think is the most challenging part. The middle mile and the first mile is more control.
Yeah.
So once you have a good plan, good supply chain execution plan, if you invite us and say digitize this, that's a much faster digitization we can do. But digitizing the last mile will take a little bit of planning, a little bit of SOP definition. Then you have to write some software to like convert that digital, the SOP into a digital event, and represent it in a cloud, so you can visualize what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And you've certainly built up, I think, a strong brand specifically in that last mile. So
Yes.
that's excellent. Um, with regards to fires, or what we call hot challenges, obviously everybody faces hurdles, I think, throughout your entire career. Maybe within the scope of tag and track, what's the biggest pain point or hurdle or challenge that you faced, whether it's around change management in IoT rollouts, or navigating tariffs, having a hardware component? What's the hardest thing over the last decade or so, that you've been doing this, that you've had to face as a company?
As a company, I think our biggest challenge right now is One, the industry, we need to really evangelize the latest and greatest technology, that what can happen. The price points have evolved, um, because the barcode versus real-time visibility, or an RFID versus more active tracking, the price points have significantly come down. That's one thing I have a big challenge to educate the industry and the decision makers on. You don't need to be stuck on an offline data logger that costs $10 for the similar, even similar or less cost. You can actually switch over into the real-time visibility type use cases, right? That's one challenge we have, is first the educating the industry into this transformation can be easy. The second challenge we have is how you digitize these operations, because on the ground you have these SOPs defined over the years, right? Now, when you're trying to deploy a technology into that SOP, the way you have to do it is you need to look at that SOP digital event, like SOP event. Then you have to convert that and capture it accurately into a digital event, so that you can represent it accurately in your portal or in your control tower. That is another challenge, is unless you have the full IP control, where you can write the sensor, you can modify it, you can define how the device behaves and collects that data in a digital format, push it into the cloud as an event. That deployment is not easy. People think that this is IoT company, there are n number of IoT companies.
Yeah.
But if you see the success rate, there are only 3 or 4 that does this well, and then the remaining, they cannot scale it beyond certain level because of this reason. It takes a lot of time and effort to figure out the wireless part of it,
Yeah.
and also writing the sensor part of it. That's the biggest challenge.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, and that resonates, Vinu. I think the other challenge is obviously communicating and conveying that to the pharmaceutical companies, because the buyers, or their RFP processes, while comprehensive, don't really get into enough of the technical aspects of
Yes.
what's viable. And so we see a lot of companies that partner with maybe a suboptimal provider, and a year later or 2 years later, they realize that, and everything that they wanted to automate,
Yes,
improve efficiencies, is not happening because they don't have the data quality.
that's correct.
And so that's a great point. And I guess to that point, that education, that barrier to educate the customer, is relatively high.
Yeah.
How do you mentioned your first point around pricing? We're seeing a lot of new device IoT vendors pop up, especially with LCC, low cost country operations.
Yeah.
And they seem to be trying to undercut the market heavily on price.
Yes.
And they're having at least some upfront short-term moderate success in doing that. How do you think the established providers that are GXP validated, that have strong solutions that are scalable, can weather the storm on this in the short term?
I think it all comes down to what type of data you want to acquire, what type of supply chain optimizations you want to do. As I said, there's one way is, I just want temperature and a dot on the map. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is, hey, can I take this data and see how much cost I can save? And if you take the second approach, that's a long-term view of how you want to develop and deploy your supply chain, right? I would go with that type of vision, and not, hey, I just want shortcut of low cost, one dot on the map, and some temperature compliance. And then one mistake or something happens to that device not performing, you might have larger impact on your brand, your reputation, and your quality control. Whereas if you go with a more conservative approach, or much better partner with the established player that knows what they're doing, then you might do well in the longer term. You might actually optimize. You might actually save money in using that data and the analytics they can infuse into your supply chain and give you insights that will save millions of dollars, right? That's the decision that the enterprise need to take. What's my long-term goal? And if they go with the long-term view, I think they should go with the more reputed company that's putting in the time and effort to qualify all this and give the quality data into their supply chain.
Yeah, it's very difficult to do a full kind of knowledge dump, into a short RFI or RFP document.
Yes.
To convey all that, but 100%. So time for a lightning round. This is actually my favorite part of the segment, of all the segments, called Hot, Cool, or Cold. So essentially, tell me if you're bullish, neutral, or pessimistic on each of the following subjects in 30 seconds or less, and why. First one should be teed up and very, very easy for you, I hope. Real-time IoT devices and visibility.
Bullish. And we see that the industry is recognizing that this is the best way to optimize the supply chain than stuck with some data logger USB putting into your laptop. So a lot of manual steps, and I think this is the best way to go automation and get your data into the right place and do more advanced stuff.
So you've actually naturally fed into my second point. Passive data loggers, are they here to stay or are they going away?
In my view, they will go away at some point. Not like fully passive, because the way we look at passive active is there will be even the Bluetooth type active devices, they'll still be considered as passive. But the way I look at it is that whole USB type approach, I think, will go away, and they'll move into more automated way to collect the data and also securely collect the data, because the USB still has a data security aspect, because they're pulling the data out and it's in spreadsheet formats, and sometimes you can edit, do whatever, right? There is issues with that type of technology, and we think that ultimately the active and automation is the way to go.
How about product quality decisions? Maybe more specifically, what's called as product release or temperature release within pharma. Do you think the industry is ready to outsource or partner on that with providers, or do you historically it's been very kept in house?
Yeah.
Do you think the industry is changing there to where they're going to rely more on providers and partners to help them with that very manual and laborious process?
I think the industry is open. We have already done a few projects with the last mile parcel vendors. We have automated their entire passive approach into a more active approach. And it's been running in for 2-3 years now. And we have collected almost 2 billion plus in data points. And they're now using that data to make more optimizations in supply chain and things like that. So the trend is happening, but it's not happening at a speed that we would like to have. But I do see that it's now it's happening much rapid pace than 2 years ago.
Yeah. How about sustainability? Obviously, a lot of focus around sustainability over the last 3-4 years. It seems to have gotten a little bit quieter over the last year. Do you think it's a checkmark play, or do you think there's genuine care towards sustainability from the industry?
From the industry, what I see is that there is a genuine interest in sustainability, especially in the packaging industry. I do see that majority of the pharma is moving from a single-use parcels to multi-use, and all the RFPs we respond to is in a high volume loop or a high value lanes. We do want to implement a full circular loops with the devices, with the boxes, with the pallets, reusable pallets. And that, I think, is definitely a good way to do it, because sustainability is a double-edged sword, right? If you have a low volume lane and then you try to implement a loop, you might actually probably your carbon footprint is much higher just moving these goods in a loop rather than doing a one-way side and then do a proper recycle on the other side. So you have to strike that balance, which lanes, or is it high volume, what is my carbon footprint looks like, and then you figure out, should I do single use and multi-use, and then use that. But as long as you have the goals and you have that judgment of which way to implement and have a proper recycling approaches, I think it's a good way. I think the industry is doing sustainable, in my view. They're putting time and effort into that.
Got it. How about last one? Gen AI in temperature controlled logistics. Is it a fad or is it ready for prime time?
It's fascinating what the Gen AI can do. I don't believe it's fad anymore. It can crunch large amounts of data in a short term, and which would have taken 6-7 months for a project analyst to digest all this data and to come up with analytic insight. We can now do this whole thing in less than a week, like 2-3 days. We set up a proper data lake and we run the AI on top. It gives you the insights that you haven't think through.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ease of use, right? It is so easy to develop these insights and any common warehouse analyst, like manager, can go and type in and say, show me what my top 3 problems today are. And then before, they would have to invite the project analyst and the developer to pull a dashboard, write all the things, show up a nice graph, and hey, this is what is happening this week. But with this one, you get this at your fingertips. Like, you type in a query, it pulls the entire thing in a table, in a graph, in whatever format you want. It can even send an email to your end customer and say, hey, this is the recovery plan, and this is how we want to do it. So that's, to me, is I think is there. The technology has arrived, and we have passed that hype curve. We crossed the chasm, and now I think the real applications are going to start flowing.
Okay. So in terms of, I guess, in that vein, in terms of future predictions for cold chain, what do you think is the biggest kind of trend or innovation that you envision reshaping the cold chain industry in the next, call it 1 to 2 years?
I think the one thing what we're realizing is, if you want this AI algorithms to work and predict and prescriptively give you the insight, the step 1 of that is, first you need to go acquire the data, because no supply chain is same, and you can't train the model on a data that is canned or simulated data, because it's seasonal, it is demand gen, it is air cargo, road cargo, it's a combination of that. Unless you really put some digital solutions to acquire the data and train your model, the prediction and the prescription it's providing might not be accurate. So the key is, you need to start now for this to work in a year from now, because you need to have certain amount of data to train the model, and then you start getting your a good use of your investment on the AI, right? If you don't do these 2 steps properly, then you're still struggling to say, why am I not accurate? I embrace the technology, but nothing is happening. But there is a method to the madness, and then you have to take that approach of, how do I do this step by step? And this is where partnering and working with innovative companies like us and yours, that's the best way to get this implemented.
Absolutely. Yeah. Going back to what you said around, using Gen AI for analysis. Absolutely. I think that's the easiest part. I think the consistently accurate and reliable recommendations is what's difficult.
Exactly. If you don't have reliability, if you're relying on it to give you a decision on $1 million shipments, you need to make sure that this is actually trained on a good data set, that what it gives you is the right one. If it's not trained on the right data set, it might say, hey, don't ship this one on this route. it might not be true, and then you might be just unnecessarily holding off the shipment. That's where I see the caveat is you need to train, you need to acquire the data first, and then train it to make it very reliable, accurate prediction, and then you make decisions on it.
Yeah. And in addition to that data, you need to figure out how to map that data to existing processes and workflows that exist within an organization. Otherwise,
Exactly.
you're getting very generic information, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the difference. I think that's where the holy grail is in how to make this whole thing work, and that's why you have to have a partnership. You have to build this through a thought process and build it from ground up and make sure that it works end to end.
Yep, makes sense. Last segment here, Vinu. So, we'd love to hear a very short, kind of less than a minute logistics legend story, a time where either you yourself or a colleague went above and beyond to get the job done. Do you have anything memorable you could share?
So last year we were deploying this last mile, one of the vaccine, and we actually did it probably the industry's one of the fastest deployment for pharmaceuticals, and we were given 3 months from the requirement to the go live, and we have to test, manufacture, and deploy around 50K plus devices onto the field in 3 months. And then I remember my colleague, my hardware lead, we gave him a deadline that the devices should arrive at the warehouse by this date. And he literally went to the factory, slept on the floor, did all the audit with the customer, and we finished the audit. We kicked the line for manufacturing, we boxed them and shipped it back all in 6 weeks on the ground. And then when they arrive at the warehouse, we need to do an OTA upgrade, and we rented a U-Haul, loaded these pallets. We need to get a better signal, so we were driving around in Louisville, Kentucky, I believe, doing OTA upgrades on a U-Haul, driving around in the city with the best 5G spots are, and then we download the OTA. So these are the deployment challenges, when you have a hardware that need to perform in warehouses and trucks and that need to go nationwide. This is some of the heavy lifting we had to do, and we have a tremendous team that does this day in, day out. So pretty exciting stuff, good stories to tell as we grow.
When you guys are a $5 or $10 billion company, somebody's going to write about a book about that for sure. I can only imagine. No, that's fascinating, Vinu. Thanks for sharing that, and thanks again for sharing your journey and insights with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me. That was a fabulous conversation, and hopefully the audience likes what we shared, and we'll go from here.
I'm sure they will, no doubt. Thank you, Vinu. We'll see you soon. To wrap up, so I guess we did just wrap up, and that's one cool wrap for FrostBytes. To our listeners, thank you for continuing to tune in. Our first 6 episodes crossed 70,000 views and counting. Please do keep it going. Don't forget to subscribe and stay connected for more insights from leaders in cold chain logistics. And until next time, I'll see you soon.